going on, everybody? How's it going? We'll give a few minutes for everybody to get in here and get started, and then we'll start talking a little bit. I'm texting with my sister while I'm at it. We're talking about our trip 5 weeks from now. My sister and I are headed to Italy, so pretty excited about that. How's it going, Professor What? Hey, I think you emailed me recently about Discord. I'm going to reply to you sometime in the next day or two about that. I think it's probably a good idea. All right. So has anybody had the chance to actually watch? I know not everybody's in the U.S. and not everyone has access to it, but did anybody get to see Sweet Revenge, the episode of Unbelievable that just aired on Friday? It was a lot of fun to do, and I've got actually some news as we talk about this today. I've got some breaking news for you guys about some future work with the History Channel. So I'm excited about that. Let's go. I'm going to the game, my very first Ohio State game ever. This Saturday, I'm going to see Ohio State and Michigan. And actually, the two guys that I'm going with are two guys that I met because they came with me on our group tour that we did to Germany and Austria about a year ago. Kevin's a Michigan fan. Jonathan lives here in Northeast Ohio, and the three of us are going to the game together. And so I'm excited about that. And it's going to be cold. It's going to be real cold. It's about 30 degrees Fahrenheit is the planned high for the game. And we're going to be up in the top, so it might be windy. So I am ready to dress accordingly. Yeah, greetings from Jefferson County. Very cool. So, for those of you who do not have cable, if you live in the United States or if you have one of those things, what are they called? VPN, and you can pretend to be in the United States, you can watch it. I put the link in the description of this stream. You can actually watch the full episode 2 is available. QVPN ad. So there are several more episodes that I'm going to be in during this season, and make sure that you have your notifications turned on and you're subscribed, because I will post in the community like posts when those episodes are coming out. The producer will email me each week before one of my episodes plays. She did that last week. So I'll definitely let you guys know when it's an episode that I'm going to be in. What are my thoughts on Jimmy Stewart? I love Jimmy Stewart, one of my all-time favorite actors. He's from Indiana, Pennsylvania. I've been to Indiana several times. Yes, I have absolutely been interested in Canadian history. I don't know nearly enough about it. Have I heard about the haunted side of Gettysburg? Yeah, if you spend any time in Gettysburg at all, and I've been there a couple dozen times now, you can't help but hear about it. But I for one, am not into that. My chair is really squeaky today. And to put this in perspective, here's how I feel about ghost tours at Gettysburg. How would people feel if they were doing ghost tours at Ground Zero at the World Trade Center site? Probably not great. That's how I feel about ghost tours at Gettysburg. I understand that there's a market for it and people are interested in that sort of thing. And as long as money can be made from it, people are going to do it. But I, for one, just have no interest in that sort of thing. Colby, at some point, if I get a chance to do some Eastern Roman Empire history, I will. Mark, yes, if you click on the link in the description of this stream, you can watch it right now. In fact, I'll show you guys because I've actually got it pulled up and frozen on a picture of me from the episode, just so I can talk a little bit about what it was like. So there you go. There's me in a really unflattering view right there. So yeah, I had a bunch of people asking if I would just share kind of my behind the scenes experience of what it was like to film something for the History Channel. And I'm going to actually share I'm going to share two stories because I've done two different projects with the History Channel, and they're very, very different experiences because of the nature of those, and I'll explain what I mean by that as I go along. Somebody asked about the timestamp. I'm in it multiple times, so basically, this series that I'm on right now is called Unbelievable with Dan Aykroyd. And what it is each episode, and it is real history. It's not like aliens or anything like that. This is all real history. Each episode has a theme, a history-related theme. So this particular episode was called Sweet Revenge. And then what happens is within the episode, you're going to get 6, 7, 8 different stories that all relate to that common theme. So in this case, all stories of revenge, people who got revenge in one form or another. And I actually filmed 4 of the stories, but they only used me in 2 of the 4 stories that I filmed. And there are several other stories that I didn't even know about until I watched it. So I filmed for the story of Olga of Kiev, the story of Vlad the Impaler. I filmed for the story of this woman who was a wealthy woman down in Argentina who got revenge on some people by building a skyscraper, and it's all explained in there. And then I filmed, there was another one that I filmed too that they didn't end up using any of my bits for it, but I'll explain kind of how the whole process worked as we go along. Let me catch up with a few of these super chats first. Jedi, perhaps. There definitely is a aversion to AI things by a lot of people on the channel, so I try to do the AI stuff sparingly, but I'll check it out at some point. Dan, do I know the USS Edsel? I do not. I'm not familiar with that, but I did see the story about them finding the wreck. And you had a great uncle on board. Wow, what a cool connection to history. Do I think Richard III is underrated? No, I don't really. It was a 2-year reign. He really didn't have a lot of time to do anything of any significance. I don't think he was nearly as evil as some people try to sell him as being. American Battlefield Trust made a video about the Battle of Newmarket. Very cool. Yes, I remember talking to you about the museum, and I still have plans to get to the Shenandoah Valley at some point. So let me tell you a little bit about, so somebody said, is that a real warehouse or is it a green screen? Well, let me show you what my view looked like, and that will answer the question. All right, let's see here. Here you go. That's what it actually looked like when I filmed. So yes, it was a green screen. That's why different people have different backgrounds. All right. So let me tell you a little bit about how this all came about. And I've actually had 2 experiences now filming for the History Channel. 2 very different experiences in completely different places with completely different production teams. Yeah, your questions about the details, hopefully, like what you asked Cash about how long I was in the studio, hopefully that'll all be answered. So in this case, for Unbelievable, since the first episode just aired. Oh yeah, JD, is JD here? Very cool. Nuclear waste facility. The nuclear waste facility is in a future episode. That wasn't this episode. But yeah, I did get to talk about the nuclear waste facility that JD actually did a video from. So that is coming one of them in one of the future episodes. So anyway, so how this first came about was back in, must have been April of this year. I got an email from a producer for this show for season 2 of Unbelievable with Dan Aykroyd. And as it turned out, the way that they found me was that this producer who reached out to me, who was a really sweet girl, and I didn't actually get to meet her in person. She was just handling all the bookings and everything. She wasn't actually one of the team that was there filming. But her boyfriend is a big fan of vlogging through history. And he said, you should look into bringing him on as one of your on-screen historians for this series. And so they reached out to me, and we talked about it, and it sounded like it would be a good fit. So I agreed to do it. And what was involved was I was going to be filming for 4 episodes. I don't know how many episodes are in this season. I'm starting to think it's going to be more than 10, which was in the first season. So what they said was we're going to be doing all these different topics. And they gave me the overall topic. So like I knew that one of them was sweet revenge and it would be stories of revenge, but I didn't know more than that. I didn't know specifics. And I said, listen, I don't know if I'm going to be an expert on all of these different topics. And they said, it's okay. What we need are people who are passionate about history, who know history, who aren't afraid to learn a few new things in preparing for this, but then we'll be able to tell the story well on camera. And so I said, hey, I'd love to do it. And so she put me in contact with the people to schedule the date. They had like 3 or 4 different dates that were available to me to come to New York City to film. And then I had to pick what date would work best for me. And then I worked with their travel people to book the flight. So they flew me from Pittsburgh to New York City to LaGuardia, gave me vouchers to be able to use Uber to get to and from the hotel and to the recording studio. And this was actually filmed at A&E Studios in Manhattan, which A&E History Channel, it's the same network. It's all owned by the same company. And so originally I was supposed to go in the night before, but the way the schedule worked out, I was going to have to fly in that day, which I was a little nervous about. And what they do is then, let me get this off the screen here. A week before filming, just a week before, and they told me it would be a week before, they sent me the details of the stories that I'd be talking about. So that was the first I knew I'd be talking about Olga of Kiev and Vlad the Impaler and talking about Sealand and all these different things like that. So I had about a week then to prepare, to familiarize myself with the stories that I wasn't already familiar with. Vlad the Impaler, I knew that story already. Some of the other stories I already knew really well. There were a few I didn't know much about. And so I just familiarized myself. It was basically like cramming for an exam. And I got more familiar so that I was confident with the stories when I went in. And so then I had my time that I was showing up, and my filming slot was 4 to 7 p.m. It was going to be a solid 3 hours sitting in that chair. I think I left that chair for 5 minutes. Otherwise, I was sitting in that chair for 3 hours. So I got there about a half hour early. There were security guys at the base of the building. The building's in Manhattan, Midtown Manhattan. It's not far from like the Chrysler Building. And I went in. Security had my like credentials already, and they sent somebody down to get me and escort me up to the green room up on the floor that we're filming on. I hung out in the green room for about 15-20 minutes while they prepared everything. They had snacks and drinks, and it was all very professional and very cool. So then they brought me in, and basically they walked me into the room that you see here. And this picture was actually taken by one of the producers who I didn't even know took the picture. My eyes are closed, so it's not the best, but then he texted it to me later. So that was really cool. And so they sat me in this chair, and it's like this throne. I was like up, like my feet were about 2 feet off the ground. And I was a good 20 feet from the producers. So we were talking from a real distance, which is, as I'll explain later, a very different experience than my first time recording with the History Channel. And there were like 5 people in the room. And it was interesting because they had explained to me that on this particular show that they're doing, that we say everything in the present tense, even though we're talking about stories sometimes that are from 1,000 years ago. And so there's a bit of a trick to that, because when you're talking about history, it's so easy to default into past tense. Olga of Kiev did this, instead of saying she does this, as we're telling a story like it's happening in real time. And so one of the people who was in the room, that was their whole purpose, was to catch me when I use the wrong tense and say, hey, say that exactly the same way you just did, but use the present tense. And so then I would repeat it. So little things like that. They were always like making sure that there were no fuzzies on my jacket and things like that, making sure everything looked okay. And I had different people depending on the episode. Each episode had a different producer. And so I was being asked questions for Sweet Revenge by one person, but then once we were done with those stories, we immediately switched over to the next episode that I was filming for, and I had a different person asking me questions. And this was like rapid fire. It was like, so after Olga has these people buried alive, tell us what happens next. And so then I would just kind of talk about what happens next. Okay, and tell me more about that, and just little prompts like that. And then basically you're just talking. And so for 4 episodes of the show, I was for about 3 hours sitting in that chair, just rapid fire, just being asked questions. And sometimes they would say, hey, you know what, can you expand on that a little bit, say a little bit more, or make sure you include this little bit right here, and just little prompts. But for the most part, kind of leaving you free to tell it in your own voice. But they were fantastic people. They were really fun to work with. I had a blast. They were very complimentary, very supportive. It was a really, really great experience that I had doing all of that. And let me get to a few of the questions, and then I'll kind of continue telling the story of how this all went. I should do a video on the Toledo War to give context on OSU. Actually, I've done a video on the Toledo War. It was a couple months ago. We did a video on that topic. Night King, random, but have you ever read any Bernard Cornwell's historical fiction? I have not, but I'm a huge fan of Sharp and Last Kingdom and those things, the TV versions of those. Samuel Gaming, 2 questions. What do you think of people saying we're on the verge of civil war? I think it's ridiculous. We're not. We're going to be fine. What have I thought about bringing on people on calls live? I don't know how exactly I'd go about doing that, but I suppose it's something that could be done. Film Nerdy, thank you. No questions. Just want to say congratulations. Film Nerdy, definitely do it. It's worth it. You never know what might happen. I never in a million years thought that I'd have almost 500,000 subscribers. I just did it because it would be fun and give me an outlet. So you never know what might happen with it. Zach, you ate too much. My Thanksgiving's on Friday because my kids aren't coming to me until tomorrow evening. So they'll be with mom during the day. So I'm making Thanksgiving dinner on Friday for us. Do I think the Confederates had a chance at Gettysburg if Lee listened to Longstreet, or are they doomed either way? I mean, they could have won the battle, but they weren't going to win the campaign. I don't see a scenario where Lee's invasion of the North is successful. More Old Britannia? Yeah, we could do some more of that sometime. I'm going to do a few more of these because I had a couple questions specifically related to what we're talking about. Really looking forward to the show of shows next year. You also mailed your first Ancestry DNA kit. It's great. I use Ancestry DNA for my research all the time. It helps me like lock down my ancestors, and actually I've found some errors that I've corrected in my genealogy because of my DNA tests. I will be at the show of shows next year. In fact, that's the only reason why January, February, March, April, May, first 5 months of the year, the only month I'm not going to Europe is February, and that's because I'm doing the show of shows. You've rekindled my interest in U.S. history. Top book recommendations that covers the 1700s to near present day. I don't know any that covers that broad of a topic. Excuse me. Most of the books I read these days are very niche. They're very specific to an event or a person. So maybe some other people in the chat can recommend some broad U.S. histories that are good, because it's been a long, probably since college, that I read anything that covered that broad of an area. Caden, thank you for that. I would love for you to join a group trip, and I'm thinking about one to South Africa, in fact. Residuals Legacy, did they have a reason why they used individuals from different disciplines to give commentary on subjects they're not involved with? You were surprised to see a physicist comment on history. Yeah, they didn't give a reason for that. But like I said, I think for this particular show, now it was very different for when I did the Great War, because for the Great War, they were after something very specific, and specifically they wanted somebody who did have a depth of knowledge about the topic. This particular show is much more surface level. It's much more about giving you a bunch of different stories. And so it's very unlikely you're going to find anybody who's going to be an expert on every one of those stories, because in a given episode, you're telling 8 different stories. And in this filming session that I did, I was filming about 20 different stories across 4 episodes. There was no way that anybody was going to be an expert on all 20 of those stories. No historian has that kind of breadth of knowledge, especially when you see some of the stories that involve very unique things in history that most people don't even know about. So I think that's really what it comes down to, is they just wanted people who are very knowledgeable about history, but also are good communicators of history and can do that on screen. So, anyway, so we ended up filming, like I said, for 4 episodes. And one of those episodes, actually, I guess I can probably tell you, because I wasn't allowed to actually tell you guys even what show it was that I filmed for. I was allowed to say I filmed for the History Channel, but they told me that I couldn't specifically say what the show was until they started advertising for it. So as soon as they started advertising for this season, I was able to talk about it. So there were 10 episodes last season. I don't know how many they're going to be this time. But some of the other stuff we talked about this, you may have heard of this thing, Sealand, which is, it's a World War II anti-aircraft platform that's in international waters off the coast of England that these people claimed and created a sovereign nation out of. So we talk about that. We did a story about the nuclear waste facility out in Missouri, which I know my friend JD, the History Underground, has done a video from that site. We did one about the woman who was on board Titanic, Britannic, and Olympic during all 3 of them and their brushes with disaster. She was on Titanic when it sank, but survived. She was on Britannic when it sank in World War I, but survived. She was on Olympic when it nearly sank. So we tell her story. So there's a lot of different really fantastic stories coming ahead. Now, so that was in the spring. I filmed that was it May? I think that was in May we filmed that. So then they reach out to me again a few weeks after we filmed and said, hey, we'd like to bring you back to do 4 more episodes. And I was like, great, that'd be awesome. They wanted to have me basically be in the entire season at this point. And I got the material. Again, they sent it to me a week before. I started studying up, got really sick, and wasn't able to go on the day that they had planned. And we ended up having to change the date. And I could have gone back and filmed, but I was going to England for this Masters of the Air tour, and so it wasn't available. So I ended up not being able to film those 4 episodes, or I would have had 4 more episodes I was in. But actually, just in the last couple of days, they just emailed me again, and they want me to come back in February to film for 4 more episodes. Or I think it's 3 more episodes. So I'm already in 4 episodes, and I'm going back to film for 3 more episodes next February. So that means this season must be going for a while, or they're doing a second half to the season, because they're filming more in February. So the whole thing lasted 3 hours. We finished up. I shook everybody's hand, thanked them. They thanked me. It was a fantastic experience. Could not have gone better. I was very happy with it. And then it was just a matter of sitting around and waiting. And I didn't know who else had been in it. I asked them about Dan Aykroyd, and they said basically they bring him in after everybody else has filmed everything, and he does his stuff at the end. So obviously, no, I did not meet Dan Aykroyd. And I didn't meet anybody else who filmed. I believe that my friend Gary Edelman is in this season as well. I don't know which episodes he filmed for. He filmed, I think, for the episodes that I was supposed to film for and couldn't. So I know Gary's going to be in some of them. I know at least one of the other people who was in this episode with me was also in the Great War. So, and he did a fantastic job. So, so yeah, so I was very, very happy with the whole experience, and I'm looking forward to going back and filming more in February. So that was one experience. Let's do some more super chats here real quick. And then I'll tell you how that differed. I've talked some in the past about my experience filming the Great War, but I'll go back and share for those who missed it, just to kind of share with you how very, very, very different that experience was. Also a positive, but very different. And I'll explain why that was so different as we get into that. Crosley, really enjoy your content, but I'm not going to say it. I'm not reading those words. Ohio State's going to win. Sorry. Intello, I know this is a history channel, but love your vids, but I'm a Muslim. Do you have any beginner Christian theology books? Actually, I don't. I wish I did. I can't think of any off the top of my head. It's been a long time since I've read any Christian theology books. So again, I would ask anybody in the chat who might be able to make recommendations. It's great, though, that you want to learn those things. And I'm very interested in learning more about Muslim theology as well. I think it helps a lot for me to understand history when I can understand the religions that shaped much of the history. John, what's going on? For all-encompassing U.S. history books, go with The Men Who United the States by Simon Winchester and Presidents of War by Michael Beschloss. Very cool. Thank you for those recommendations. American Nerd, with December coming real soon, what's your favorite version of A Christmas Carol? Yours are Scrooged, the Muppets one, and the 2009 Robert Zemeckis one. I really like the one. I don't know if this is the one you're thinking of. Yeah, the one with George C. Scott. No, wait, no. The Zemeckis one's the animated one. Okay. I like the one with George C. Scott, and I like the one with Patrick Stewart a lot, too. Ni hao from China. Use of the present tense is a great way to bring the audience into the moment. And I think, that's exactly what I think was the point. Is if you watch the episode, you'll see what we're trying to do is just tell a narrative, tell a story, and get people involved and interested in the story. And the funny thing is, the power of editing. There was so much more we told about that story than what ends up, because they slice it down into like an 8-minute story. Whereas I spent just myself probably 20 minutes talking about that story. And I was one of 4 or 5 different people who were telling that story in that video. So, it's the power of editing. It's the way they do things, but I thought it came out good. And I had no idea who else was in the episode or which of my clips were going to be used until I saw it live, just like everybody else did. During my trips to France, have I visited the Basilica of Saint-Denis, where almost all the kings of France are buried? No, but that is high on my bucket list of places I want to get to. Absolutely. Even though they have 0 chance, go Knowles. Have I seen Gladiator 2 yet? No, but I did see Wicked. I went and saw Wicked the other day, and it was fantastic. And I've seen Wicked on Broadway. I also saw it on the tour when it came to Cleveland, and love Wicked. It was really, really good. The music, the movie version did it justice. And I was a little concerned because they turned an hour and a half long act 1 into a 2-hour, 40-minute video, but it worked. It worked really well. I thought it was good. Yes, Wicked is also a book. It was a book first, actually. So Dominic says, for Christian theology, go with Reason for God. Tim Keller, I'm a big fan of Tim Keller as an author. So, I'd be on board with that. And Gavin Ortland, I'm not familiar with him, but there you go. There's a couple of good recommendations for you. All right, so let me tell you a little bit about the other experience that I had, which was for the Great War. This was a much longer process when I filmed for the Great War. So, all right, first I'll answer this question because I know you asked it once before, Christian. Have any of my ancestors had controversial stories? Oh, yeah, quite a few. And I'm sure that's true for anybody. One of my ancestors was Edmund Whalley, who was one of the generals in Cromwell's New Model Army during the English Civil War. He was one of the regicides. He signed the death warrant for the execution of King Charles. So obviously that's a controversial story. I have an ancestor, John the Butcher Clifford, who killed Edmund, the Earl of Rutland, who was the brother of Kings Edward IV and Richard III. Killed him during the Wars of the Roses. He was only 17. I have two ancestors who were hanged in the Revolutionary War. There were loyalists, there were Tories, hanged by the Americans for their involvement as loyalists in the Revolution. So those are the first ones that come to mind. Estella, yes, absolutely. And I've shared a little bit of this story already, but 2 years ago, I was in Liège, Belgium, for a Band of Brothers tour. We were touring sites associated with the Battle of the Bulge, going to the Bois Jacques and Bastogne and, and a lot of other Battle of the Bulge places. And we were staying in a hotel there in Liège. And it was Phil McKee was there, who played Colonel Strayer in Band of Brothers. My friend Matt, who plays Talbot, was there. Freddie Joe Farnsworth, who was one of the military advisors on Band of Brothers and also appears briefly in the Carentan episode on a horse, was there. And we ran into this guy, Billy Budd, who these guys knew from he had worked on Band of Brothers. And Billy, they didn't know he'd be there. And Billy was fantastic. I'm friends with him on Facebook now. And he's a wonderful guy, British guy, who was in Liège because he was there helping film this new movie. And he hadn't told us the name of it or what the topic was. He starts describing to me. He says, so we're filming this movie. He said, you're probably not familiar with the guy, but he was a German Lutheran pastor who was involved in the plot to kill Hitler and ended up being executed right at the end of the war at Flossenburg prison. And I said, oh, you're talking about Dietrich Bonhoeffer. He goes, yeah, how did you know that? I'm like, oh, I know Bonhoeffer's story. So I was in Liège with some other friends when they were filming the Bonhoeffer movie. So I've known this movie was coming for like 2.5 years. Been really excited. Haven't seen it yet. I know JD has seen it. And I think JD is going to Flossenburg. He might have been there today. I don't know. I'm definitely planning to get to Flossenburg. But yeah, I'm super, super excited to see Bonhoeffer. I definitely want to see it. And I want to see Gladiator 2. So yeah, a lot of movies I want to see right now. What do I think of Jeff Shera's books? Great. I really enjoy them. I know Jeff. I've hung out with Jeff. He's a great guy. Every time I'm in Gettysburg for any kind of an event, Jeff's usually a part of those events too. So I've had the chance to get to know Jeff a little bit. And I think it's a cool way to look at history through that kind of historical fiction that takes real people in real situations where we don't know the individual conversations they had, but ascribes to them plausible conversations and a plausible novel based on the events. So yeah. Have I ever seen German historical movies like Bismarck from 1940? I haven't seen a German one. I've seen Sink the Bismarck, which is obviously an English language one. All right. So let me tell you a little bit about the Great War. So if you saw it back in May, my first appearance on the History Channel was for the 4-hour docudrama The Great War, which appeared on the History Channel. I ended up being in way more of that than I thought I'd be. And that one, that actually goes back a long time because my grandfather, who is really the father who raised me, he passed away in December of 2022. And he knew that I was going to be filming for that. I hadn't filmed for it yet. So I know that it goes back to 2022. I think it was the fall of 2022 when they first reached out to me about that. And that one was a much longer process. That started out with the producers reaching out to me. And this one was not done by the History Channel. The History Channel doesn't always produce their own stuff. They outsource a lot of it to production companies that they hire to do the stuff. And that was the case with this one. This was a production company that was hired to do the Great War. And so the production company reaches out to me. And this is the same production company that did, if you've seen the Apple TV version of the Hamilton musical, which was filmed on stage, that was the same production company that did The Great War. Adam, yes, I have. And I'll get, I have read the Irish Proclamation. I've got it here home with me. So they reached out in the fall of 2022. And in that case, what had happened was James Early, who has a podcast, a history podcast, who's a professor down in San Antonio, Texas. He and I have gotten to know each other through YouTube. He's a fan of the channel, and he had been brought on board to do the Great War. And they asked him if he knew anybody who was an expert on the Great War. I'm not an expert, but I'm getting there. Who he thought might be good. And so he recommended me to them. So they reached out to me, and basically I auditioned for that one. So what I did was I actually went on a Skype call, or not Skype, a Zoom call, used to be Skype, a Zoom call with a couple of the producers, and they basically put me through what I would go through in filming, and said, they just kind of threw some prompts out and just asked me to respond. Yeah, tell me about John Pershing. And so I would just kind of go on about John Pershing for a little bit. And what do you know about the St. Mihiel offensive? And I would talk a little bit about that. And by the time it was done, they seemed pretty confident that they were interested in having me for the documentary. But basically it was one of those, hey, we'll get back to you and you'll hear from us down the road, kind of thing. And so I didn't hear anything for a good 6 or 8 months after that. And it was like the summer of 2023 then that they reached out and said, hey, we're finally ready to start filming. We still want you for the Great War. We've got this date available in Minneapolis, Minnesota, and we've got this date available in Los Angeles, California. Can you do either one of these dates to come and film with us? And I was available for either date, but I was thinking, man, Los Angeles, that is like a 5.5 hour flight to go and film for the day. And I'm already going to be tired. So I think I'd rather go to Minneapolis. So I went to Minneapolis in August of 2023 to film for the Great War. And a couple weeks earlier, they had sent me a list of 100 questions that they would potentially be asking me for this. So I was able to at least brush up on any of the places where there was maybe a hole in my knowledge. I'd say probably 75% of it I already knew pretty well. But there were some things I wanted to brush up on and be prepared with. So I flew out, and they told me for that one, they said it's suit and tie. We want people to look professional, so wear a suit and tie. I have suits and lots of ties, but I very rarely wear suits and ties, pretty much when I'm doing weddings and funerals. It's the only time you'll see me in a suit and tie. But I've never had a new suit. I've always bought them like at a thrift store, hand-me-downs, things like that. So I actually went out and bought a brand new suit. It wasn't expensive, like $200, specifically for the History Channel. And it was the same suit that I wore minus the tie for Unbelievable. And you said I came to Minneapolis and didn't visit Fort Snelling. Listen, this is a bang bang thing, right? So they fly me in the afternoon of the day before. I'm there for a few hours, long enough to just walk around the city for about 2 hours, grab some dinner, get back to my hotel room, brush up on everything. And then at like 11 a.m. the next morning, I'm going down to film. And so I get there to film. It's 100 degrees in Minneapolis. I never thought it got that hot. It was 100 degrees in Minneapolis, Minnesota in August of 2023. And I'm going in. And let me show you a little shot of where I'm filming for this one. So there's a little selfie I took. It's a little building. The room that we're in is maybe 20 by 20 feet. It's got a little window air conditioner in the corner that's super loud. That's keeping us from roasting to death in the 100-degree heat. I'm wearing a full suit and tie. As soon as we start filming, they got to turn off the air conditioner. So it is roasting in that room. Compare that to when I was in New York for the Unbelievable shoot. It was freezing in that room. So it was humid, it was hot. And as you can see here, you can't really see super well, but I was sitting right here in that chair. And the producer was sitting in a chair to where our knees almost touched. That's how close we were to each other. That light that you see was like 2 feet from my face. And then I'll show you, I took a quick picture of the monitor so I could see what it was going to actually look like on the film itself. Let's see here. So then this is what I could see the background was going to look like. I was like using my phone real quick while we had a short break. And then that's basically the exact view that you see of me when they're filming when you see me in all those scenes in the Great War. So, so we sit down, and Will, who was amazing, super, super easy to work with. I was really, really nervous. I don't get nervous. Very few times in my life have I been nervous about something. And this was one of those times because I'd never done anything like this, not for a big production like this. I had no idea exactly what to expect. I wasn't sure how confident I would be. So I was a little nervous. I was real nervous going into it. And I'd crammed all night making sure that I knew the topics. And I had no reason to be nervous. I got in there, number one. Will, the producer, made me so at ease and was just fantastic to work with. Like I said, he's real close. And so if you watch The Great War, and I did end up in quite a bit of that, it seems like I'm talking kind of quiet, like I'm not very outgoing. I'm very kind of laid back and quiet. And that's because Will was like 2 feet in front of my face. And so I was talking to him and he was super close to me. That's why I'm so quiet. But he, again, it was really, really easy. Like he would say, so tell me a little bit about, like, what are the challenges that John Pershing is facing when he arrives in France in 1917? And I would go and maybe give a couple of sentences about that. And one nice thing I have going for me is I've done a ton of media interviews for Rachel's Challenge. So I've learned really well how to do the soundbite answer. Because if you give a 30-second answer, they're not going to use 30 seconds. If you give a 10-second answer, there's a good chance they'll use the whole answer. So you prevent them from selectively editing your entire thought if you can keep your thought concise. So I've learned to do that. So I was really good at being able to give him those soundbite answers, which is what they're after. But occasionally he would say, okay, so riff on that a little bit more. And that was the exact phrase he would use, is riff on that a little bit more. Like he wanted me to elaborate on a particular topic. Or they might say, you know what? Don't use the date. We don't want to be that specific, because I would sometimes give more specific of an answer than what they were after. They wanted to give themselves a little bit more leeway. And so occasionally he would kind of redirect or ask me to reframe the answer in such a way that fit within the story of what they're telling. So those are the kinds of things. But again, it was a fantastic experience. I think we filmed for about 2 hours for that. And in that case, like I said earlier, they gave me about 100 questions that they were going to ask. And they were filming not only for The Great War, but this was also a film session for the 1 hour documentary that came out in February about the Harlem Hellfighters. They didn't end up using any of my stuff for the Hellfighters because they had other people who were specifically experts on that unit. But by the time I came in, he contacted me the day before the film shoot. And he said, you're like 24 out of 25 people that were interviewing for this. So by that point, they had interviewed almost everybody that they were going to potentially use. And if you watch The Great War, there weren't 25 of us in there. There were maybe 10 of us, 10, 12 of us. So obviously some people filmed and didn't appear in it at all, which I'm sure had to be really disappointing for them. But he said, so because we've had so many already, we've got some of these topics that have been well covered by people. But, specifically, there were some topics that not many people had a lot of knowledge about. And so he said, we really want to focus hard on Some Hell, on Cantigny, for example, on talking about Pershing, talking about the Kaiserschlacht, the offensive. So there were certain parts of the story they were going to ask me to key in on more heavily. So I had a little bit more to prepare for in that way. The Great War is not on YouTube. There are clips of it on YouTube. So here, I'll actually pull one up for you so you can see. You can see here the shot of my the picture I took from the monitor. I'll go to one of these clips and then I'll show you what it actually looked like on screen. But I was actually pleasantly surprised. I was in it a whole lot more than I expected to be, which was pretty cool. And it was very surreal to see myself on the History Channel. It was really, really pretty insane. Okay, here we go. So let me see if I can find one of the places where I'm in. There you go. Here we go. So let's see here. So here's what it looks like. I look very professional and serious and stuff. I don't know why they said historian and podcast host. I don't know whose idea that was, because by that point I wasn't really recording the podcast anymore. But yeah, it was a blast. I had a blast doing it, and it was absolutely surreal to see. And I definitely look forward to doing it again. Now, another thing, because I know people will ask this: did I get paid for the Great War? I did not. I did not get paid a dime for that. They covered my travel expenses, my food expenses while I was there. Basically, all the expenses from me leaving my house till I got back to my house, they covered. But I did not get paid for it. I did get paid. Wasn't a lot, but I did get paid for Unbelievable. But either way, it was a fantastic experience. I'm really glad I did it. It was really, really, really a lot of fun. So, all right, let's get back to some questions here. More on France. Did you know Notre Dame de Paris is reopening? I did hear that it was reopening. I was really disappointed it was closed when I was in Paris. I've not visited Saint-Chapelle either, but those are definitely places I hope to get back to. And yeah, I already talked about this. I have done a video on Alan Turing. So if you just look for Vlogging Through History, Alan Turing, it should turn up. Speaking about Nazis, you watched The Zone of Interest. What a film. I haven't seen that one yet, but that's definitely something I'm going to check out. Next, I'll have Philomena Kunk looking at me. I would absolutely love the challenge of that. That would be a blast, trying to go toe-to-toe with Philomena Kunk. Clay CGM, thank you so much for being a member. Besides Lincoln, which president you think had the most difficult job when they got into office? Ooh. George Washington, because he was coming in with no precedent whatsoever. Yeah, it was crazy what he had to deal with. What episodes? What are the episodes on? So the one that already aired is about stories of revenge. No, it's not conspiracy stuff. It's all legit, real history. I wouldn't have done it otherwise. Plot twist, he isn't wearing pants in that video. I wish I wasn't wearing pants in that video. It would have been a lot more comfortable, because as soon as we were done filming, I went into the bathroom and changed into a t-shirt and shorts, because I went directly from the studio where I filmed for the Great War, went straight to the airport from there. So I was out of that suit really fast after that. Would I consider Martin Luther King a socialist? Maybe in some parts of his beliefs, but for the most part, I would say no. I think FDR is a good answer. He had to deal with the Great Depression and World War II. FDR did cross my mind when answering that question just now. Did he announce that already? Are you looking forward to Jeopardy with Mr. Terry? I didn't know he had actually talked about that publicly. So yes, I am looking forward to that. It's not on Jeopardy. Mr. Terry's actually hosting. He's putting together a Jeopardy show. And I do know who I'm competing against. Has he said that publicly? Because I don't want to answer anything. I don't want to give anything away that has not been asked or has not been said. But I do know who I'm up against in my episode with Mr. Terry. I don't know when we're filming that yet, but yeah, he did talk about it in the server. You're helping design the categories and the clues. Okay, very cool. Did Professor what? Did he say who I'm up against? Can I talk about that? Or is that still a secret? He has finalized it. I know exactly who I'm with. All right, you know what? I'll give it away. Hopefully it's not a big deal. There's only 500 people on the stream watching. So I'm going up against the cynical historian and one of the guys from History Dose. That's who I'm going up against. So should be fun. Okay, back to some questions here. Why are you not a supporter of worker unions? It has done wonders for the low and middle class workers throughout the history of your country. It's not that I'm not a supporter of worker unions. It's just that in many cases, I feel like these days, I absolutely recognize their historical importance and that they achieved a lot of really important things. I feel like, though, at this point, the unions have often actually hurt things. I'll give you a great example of that. We had a GM assembly plant here in my local community. When I was in high school, like half the kids in my class, their dads were, and a lot of their moms worked at GM at the assembly plant. Like, that was the place to work. If you were working an hourly job of some kind, like a manufacturing job, or a job that wasn't like based on like a college degree, that was the place to work. Some people made really good money there, had great benefits. It was a fantastic job to have. And you knew that if you had a friend whose parent worked there, they were doing fairly well for themselves. But as negotiations came around and there'd be strikes, the union demands were such that it ended up causing the plant to close. Like, their unwillingness to compromise basically led to the company saying, well, screw you, we're just going to shut it down and then you won't have a job. And that has hurt, I think, American automobiles in general. I don't buy American cars. I just don't. I want to. I would love to. I would love to support American manufacturing. But the fact is, for the same price, I can buy a foreign car that is way more reliable than the American car. And one of the main reasons why is that American manufacturers have all these legacy costs because of their negotiations with the unions, all of these pensions that have to be funded. And I'm not saying those are bad things. It's wonderful for those workers that they had good benefits and a pension and all that stuff. But in the end, as time has gone on, that has hurt American manufacturing, because those companies have then said, you know what, rather than pay these union workers, we're going to go to a place where we can pay non-union workers far less, and we can sell our vehicles cheaper and sell a better product because of it. I don't know what the answer to that is. I'm not suggesting that American workers shouldn't have good benefits and shouldn't have good jobs and pensions and health insurance and all that stuff. But I guess what I'm saying is I see the negative side to that. And it's a very perfectly logical thing to blame the companies for not being willing to pay those workers. But I guess I just don't see an easy answer to that. And I've seen a lot of people lose their jobs where I live because the union leadership was not willing to negotiate. Unfortunately, I'm absolutely not saying unions should be banned at all. I'm just saying that I can see both sides, and I'm not a real like super pro-union guy. And I'm with Franklin Roosevelt on this, that I've got a real problem with public sector unions going on strike, police, teachers. My first week of high school was spent at home because our teachers were on strike. And 4 years later, when I started college, my very first class in college for education as a major was teaching is not a poor man's profession. You know, this idea that teachers are not paid well, it's ridiculous. It absolutely is. I don't know where that ever came from, but a teacher with 20, 25 years experience and a master's degree is getting paid really, really well with great benefits, working 190 days a year. And I say that as somebody with a background where I studied for education and with family members who are in education. And I love education. I love teachers. I think it's ridiculous, the idea that we're talking about teachers as being poor. It's not true at all. But I absolutely oppose the idea of people who work government jobs being able to go on strike. Just the way I think. But anyway, I don't want to talk about that. I don't want to get into all that. That's not what we're here to talk about. I don't want to alienate anybody because you're in a union or have a job. Somebody asked me the question. I answered it. If you're in a union, good for you. I hope it works out really well for you. And I hope that you continue to do really well in that situation. I've just seen too many people that haven't, unfortunately. Are you scared about the state of democracy in the U.S.? I'm a law expert, and the SCOTUS decision about presidential official act. No, I disagree completely with that. I'm not a law expert, but I don't see it that way at all. I'm not the least bit worried about democracy in the United States. I think people talking about, oh, if Donald Trump gets elected, it's the end of democracy. It's just a scare tactic, and both sides use scare tactics all the time. I'm not worried at all. There's not going to be a civil war. We're not going to lose our democracy. None of that stuff. Teddy, I agree with George Washington. The thing about him is he had no real frame of reference. Yeah. And so much of how presidents do things today goes back to the precedents that were set by George Washington. I'm just checking all my messages here. Do I think of Ron Paul's idea that the union could have avoided the Civil War by buying all the slaves and setting them free and outlawing it? The South would have never gone for that. No, the South never would have gone for that because that was something that was out there and suggested to kind of gradually phase it out. The South wasn't going for that. It wouldn't have worked. I wish that it was possible to have done it that way, but it wasn't. The Great War episode about Erwin Rommel, also the one on World War II channel in Indy Night Out. Yeah, Indy and I just talked about a week ago. He messaged me on Facebook and we talked a little bit. Super nice guy. I hope to get to do some collab with him one of these days down the road. Why is Woodrow Wilson considered such a great president until recently by many historians? Because most historians are liberal, and he is the father of many of the modern liberal progressive reforms. The income tax, women got the right to vote under his term, and that honestly, don't give Woodrow Wilson credit for that because Theodore Roosevelt, who also ran in 1912, was also in support of women's suffrage. That was happening either way. The Federal Reserve, a lot of those things. Should Roscoe Conkling, would he have been a good president? I don't know. Maybe. I don't know enough about him to say one way or the other. Yeah, Wilson is probably hailed because of the Europe. Yeah, Wilson's actually viewed much higher for his foreign policy in countries around the world than he is here in the United States. What's my honest opinion of Winston Churchill? Exactly the leader that the UK needed, exactly at the right time in the right place, the right temperament for the job, but not a great peacetime leader. Great wartime leader, not a great peacetime leader. I'm getting the impression VTH doesn't like Woodrow Wilson, but maybe I'm jumping to conclusions. That's a fair impression. It was totally unrelated to Trump. Any president? I disagree with that. No, I don't think that's the case at all. I disagree with that. I know where you're coming from, and I know why people say that about that decision, but I don't agree. No, I talked about that earlier. I have not seen Gladiator 2 yet. What is a historical site that everyone should visit at least once if they have the opportunity? I'll give you a few. Westminster Abbey, Gettysburg, it's not a historic site, but a museum, the Holocaust Museum in Washington, D.C., the Somme battlefield, Rome, just Rome in general. Absolutely visit Rome. Pompeii is phenomenal. One of the best historic sites I've ever been to. Amazing history there. Auschwitz. So that's quite a few. Do I think Franklin Pierce would have been successful if not for the family tragedy? No, just because I think even sober, I'm not sure he was up to the challenge. It would have taken an extraordinary leader in the 1850s to have been successful with the state of where things were in the United States. And Franklin Pierce and James Buchanan weren't extraordinary presidents. He was a very good general, honorable soldier. But no, I don't know that it would have made that much of a difference. Machu Picchu, I haven't been to yet, but I've heard amazing things, and I do hope to get down there to that. Hey, VTH, you went to Bowling Green State University in Ohio and actually didn't hate that state. You grew up in Virginia. Yeah, no, I don't think that's a crazy statement. I think if you're going to talk about a single state having more history than any other, Virginia has to be in that conversation. Absolutely. And Virginia and Ohio have the most presidents of any states. So Kennedy, I had an amazing time in Ireland. I already can't wait to go back. Every American needs to go to Normandy. Yeah, I agree with Normandy, but I've only been to Normandy once, granted, and it was a great experience, but I feel like there are so many other places with rich history that aren't super overcrowded by tourists like Normandy is. Maybe go in the winter. Yeah, the U.S. survived Andrew Johnson. We can survive Trump. Absolutely. Iwo Jima Memorial, okay, in Washington, or in Northern Virginia, right outside of Washington. Do I think that there are any amendments that should be repealed or changed? Yeah, I would repeal the amendment for the direct election of senators and take it back to the way it originally was, which is that it was decided by state legislatures. Do I like Trump? No, I don't. Why don't I like you? I've done entire videos on why I don't like you. How do I think Biden will be viewed as president? Much like Jimmy Carter. Good and decent person who just did not have an effective 4 years as president. And I feel bad, especially in Biden's case, because I think his cognitive decline is such that had he been president 10 years earlier, it might have been a completely different scenario. Go back and watch video of him when he was vice president and then contrast that with him today. It's really unfortunate because I like Joe Biden as a person. I think he's a good person. I think he's got the best of intentions, much like Jimmy Carter. I just think he was not up to the job, and a lot of that is because of his age and his cognitive ability. Will I react to Mr. Beat's new video about Mormonism? I probably will at some point, yeah. Reese, that's actually a fantastic point. And I actually, with that in mind, have been thinking about doing some local history of my area, just to show people that everybody has amazing local history that maybe isn't the big stuff, but is still important. Any history podcast recommendations? My number one podcast recommendation is absolutely anything by Dan Carlin. Absolutely love Dan Carlin. Do I think Trump is a fascist? No, I do not. That's 100% why I don't like Trump is volatility. Favorite Holy Roman Emperor? Ooh. Charlemagne. Go back to the beginning. I've done a few videos about the Cold War. Yeah, but I mean, most historic sites are like that, right? I mean, you're just seeing what's left. Why isn't President Calvin Ford? Are you talking about Calvin Coolidge or Gerald Ford talked about much? I think they are as much as anybody, but people love to talk about just a select few presidents. Steve, great question. What would I have seen more of if I had more time? The countryside. I only had one day outside of Belfast and Dublin, and that was my favorite day of the trip. Not that I didn't like Belfast and Dublin, but the day that we went to Glendalough and Kilkenny and got outside of the big cities and into the countryside of Ireland was my favorite part by far. Thoughts on Rutherford B. Hayes? Underrated civil service reform? Yeah, much better, because so many people look at Hayes and all they think about is Rutherford and the controversy over how he got into office rather than his 4 years as president. Better president than a lot of people give him credit for. All right, let's catch up with a few of the super chats here. Which side of the Civil War had better generals? The Union. Definitely the Union. Grant and Sherman were better than anybody the Confederates had at high command. John Logan, James McPherson, even guys like Hooker were solid generals. I think the Union had better generals. Now, I'm talking at the top. Army and Corps commanders. The Union also had some really terrible Corps commanders, but they had a lot more of them. So there's a better chance of them having some terrible ones. Confederates also had some terrible Corps commanders. They really only had one really good Corps commander. Well, two, Jackson and Longstreet. You get down to like brigade and division command, maybe the Confederates have better generals. Can you react to Saragari, The Last Stand by Extra History? It's about the Sikh regiment defending an outpost for the British Raj. Interesting. I'm always up for more extra history. I'll have to check that one out. How do I rank Bush Sr.'s presidency from 1 to 10 from a conservative standpoint? See, conservatism is always changing. What was viewed as conservative in 1990 is not what's viewed as conservative today, but I would give him a 7. Gerrymandered senators? No, you can't gerrymander a Senate race. I mean, I guess you could if you were doing it by legislature. You did your MS at Ohio State. Very cool. And I love Denver as well. I'm just getting caught up on chat here. Do I think Mustache Man and Napoleon are actually comparable? Not even a little bit. I get so tired of that comparison. There's no comparison between Mustache Man and Napoleon at all, either in terms of competency or temperament or ambition or goals or any of it. Just no comparison at all. Do I think Charles Evans Hughes would have done as president? His record as Supreme Court Justice as a unifying Republican? I do. I think he would have been a very good president. And I think it's very unusual for folks to think about the fact that you had a Supreme Court Justice running for president of the United States. But that's how it was. Big fan, been in your videos. I appreciate that. No, we did not, Spooky Boy. We actually rejected. It wasn't really legislation. It was an issue that we voted on. We voted it down. Do I think it's right for a country to claim a historical figure even though they obviously didn't live in the country? Belgium claims Charlemagne as a folk hero. They can. Belgium was part of Charlemagne's realm that he ruled, so they can claim him as much as anybody can. I mean, as much as the French claiming him, because his headquarters, his capital was in Aachen, which is in Germany, but it's super close to Belgium. I have no problem with that. How probable is a World War III scenario given the most recent news? I'm a little nervous about the escalation that's happening. I assume you're referring to like the UK, for example, and I think France talking about sending troops to Ukraine. And of course, the missiles, the Biden administration giving Ukraine the okay to use American-made long-range missiles into Russia. Do I have a favorite time or favorite empire besides Rome from that time period? From that time period, probably not. Belgium is Charles the Great, not Charlemagne. What do you think Charlemagne means? Charlemagne is French for Charles the Great. Kinda, but they call it the Overton window, the shift of things. Conservatism isn't always. You can't narrow it down to just saying wanting to keep things the way they are. There's a lot more to conservatism than that. Am I fearful of the strong authoritarian flavor the Republican Party has taken on recently? I wouldn't say it's so much the party as it is Trump. How much do I know about the English Civil War? Not nearly enough. I know probably more than the average person. I'm planning to visit Volgograd. Not anytime soon. I would love to go to Russia, but not right now. As an American, I would not set foot in Russia right now. Great question. Should Ohio State go for the favorable 5th seed or beat Oregon and get the 1? Here's the thing. Just because it looks favorable now doesn't mean it will be favorable in a couple weeks. What you're referring to is that if you look at things as they stand, if Ohio State finishes with the 5th seed and, like, say, goes on to play Oregon and loses to Oregon again, and Oregon gets the number 1 seed as the Big Ten champ, first of all, I don't think Ohio State would still be 5th if they lose to Oregon again. They'd probably drop. But there's also no guarantee that the teams they potentially could play would still be the same. So now I say Ohio State go beat Oregon, get the number 1 seed, get that bye, play 1 fewer game. Yeah, I'm a big fan of Blackjack Logan, and his son, who's a Medal of Honor recipient, is buried here in Youngstown, Ohio, where I live. You're also named Chris. You're from Trimble, Kentucky. Very cool. And I'm from Ohio, but most of my family's from Kentucky. Would Kefauver have fared better in 1952 against Eisenhower? Nah, I think Eisenhower was going to win that election regardless. But I think Operation Barbarossa was the worst military operation in human history. In terms of being ill-advised, it's certainly in that conversation. In terms of how it basically destroyed the German war machine, yeah. All right, let's do a few more questions, and we're going to wrap it up. It's been a long day for me already, so I don't want to be on here too long. I've been to Frederick, Maryland. In fact, it's a really old video, but I have a video visiting the cemetery there where Francis Scott Key and Barbara Fritchie and some others are buried. I think it's still up on the channel. It's really old, and the quality's not great, so there's a good chance I might have taken it down. Let's take a look and see if it's still up. Oh, it is still up. Okay. So I'll show you a little bit of this because you can see, I mean, I made this video like 2 years before I even had Vlogging Through History. So here, hold on, I'll show it to you. You're talking about Mount Olivet Cemetery. So here you go. I mean, you can see how
in Mount Olivet
bumpy it is.
Cemetery in Frederick, Maryland.
I did this on my
the burial
phone.
place of several people.
And this is before you had like stabilization. And I didn't know the first thing about editing well. It's 1080p, but the quality's not great. But yeah, there you go. So there's that was from my most recent visit to Frederick, Maryland. But I'll definitely go back at some point. Both sides of the Ukraine conflict are scrambling for land before Trump comes to power. Yeah, I agree. I think that's why the escalation is because they're anticipating a shift in the landscape once Trump comes to power. So we'll see what happens with that. Except for the presidential elections of 1912 and 1916, could I pick a presidential candidate who lost to win? Who would you pick? That's a great question. Let me think about that for a minute. 1992, Ross Perot. I love the implications of a non-Republican or Democrat, a third party candidate who's not beholden to either party, winning that election and what it could mean for the future. Could we have a viable third party moving forward? And would that give us more options? I think there's some really cool possibilities to think about if that happens. Okay. Thoughts on the Second Amendment and where its limits lie. I'll say this to kind of rein in both extremes of this issue. For those who don't know, the Second Amendment is the one that is the right to bear arms. On one extreme, on the strong gun control advocacy side of things, I would say to those people, well-regulated militia doesn't mean what you say it means. It doesn't mean the way that it's spun. What it means is something very different. You should look at what well-regulated means in the context of the 18th century. On the other side, on the side in which they say the Second Amendment is a right, therefore there should be no restrictions whatsoever on gun ownership, I say that's also ridiculous because just because something is a constitutional right doesn't mean there can't be reasonable restrictions. We have a constitutional right to freedom of religion. That doesn't mean if I decide tomorrow that my religion allows for child sacrifice, that I can start sacrificing children in the name of freedom of religion. That's ridiculous. The government, of course, can rein me in on that. The freedom of speech does not give an unlimited, in all circumstances, freedom of speech. If I tell someone to go kill people and they do it, I'm responsible for that. I don't have the freedom to just do that without consequence. So likewise with guns, just because it's a constitutional right doesn't mean there can't be reasonable restrictions on that. Licensing and background checks and people not having the right to own guns, as long as there's been due process to deprive them of that right through the court system, I've got no problem with any of that. But I will also say this, for the people who argue, well, when they wrote the Second Amendment, they weren't thinking about Uzis and M16s. No, it's ridiculous. Yes, they were. They were absolutely thinking about an armed citizenry being a deterrent to tyranny. Absolutely true. They didn't write the Second Amendment so people had hunting rifles. They wrote the Second Amendment so people could keep the government in check at the force of arms if necessary. So I see both sides. I think both sides are too ridiculous. Okay. GTA Jamestown. Any good resources to learn about the Lee family? I just found out recently my great-grandmother, it was a Lee, and have connections to Robert E. Lee somewhere. Very cool, Kendall, and thank you for that. I would say the best thing to do is I would go to Virginia, go to Washington, D.C., go to Arlington, where the Lee house was, go to Lexington, Virginia, where Lee's buried. You can learn a lot by going to those places and learning about them. I can't think of a specific book that I would recommend on the Lee family, but there are a lot of really good ones out there. Thank you for that. And Chris, thank you. Yeah, we were, I think you and I were talking about that recently. Yeah, I need to get down to Charlotte. I want to get to Charlotte to do some World War or some Revolutionary War stuff, Chris. I'll definitely connect with you when we do that. And Ocean Liner Designs, I've seen a couple of his videos. They're fantastic. Have I ever been to Fort Howard in Baltimore? I have not. What if the Soviet Union was never established? Something else takes its place and becomes kind of the other side. All right, I'm going to go ahead and wrap things up here, guys. It's been great. I enjoy this. Probably do another stream this weekend sometime, another Q&A stream with everybody. So thank you to everybody who gave in the super chat. And I look forward to our next chat together. You guys take care, and happy Thanksgiving to those who are celebrating tomorrow.